I want to confess to you, I'm an addict. But the problem is that you're an addict too. And yes, I'm about to prove it. It turns out there's this clever neurotransmitter in our brain called dopamine. When it's released, it's like you're hearing, "Eat this juicy burger." At this moment, you might even momentarily taste that hot, fresh burger. And finally, when the burger is in your mouth, even more dopamine is released, triggering feelings of pleasure, enjoyment, and bliss. But if only it were limited to just burgers. Food, alcohol, social media, computer games, sex, memes, TikTok videos, drugs, cats, shopping, porn. Almost everything that brings you the slightest pleasure is dopamine. So, what's wrong with that? The thing is, dopamine used to help us survive by giving us more pleasure from a piece of meat than from some berries, because meat has more calories, and the likelihood of surviving until the next meal increased significantly. Now, we don't need to struggle for survival, but the dopamine mechanism still works, and all the world's companies are trying to capitalize on us, getting as much dopamine as possible, because our brain will constantly make us choose what gives a bigger dose of dopamine. That's why we can spend an entire day glued to our smartphones. But as soon as we try to read a book, it becomes difficult to concentrate. Thoughts wander off, and it's just boring. We are literally gorging on dopamine every day, and that's why most people can't change their lives. Because to do so, you need to do things that don't bring pleasure, or bring too little of it. But why bother if sources of dopamine are everywhere? Even right now, as you watch this video, you're receiving a small dose of dopamine. Bon appetit. What if it's not true? What if all this is just some nonsense? It can be that suddenly everyone around became addicts without realizing it. Or can it? I decided to find out what will happen if I abstain from dopamine consumption for 7 days, and the rules of the experiment are simple. No social media, no junk food or drinks, no video games, no alcohol, no music at all, no drugs, no watching movies or TV shows, nothing that can cause an emotional surge of pleasure. That means I can't even go to an amusement park. And jumping ahead, I'll tell you that everything happened not at all as I had imagined, especially what happened to me on the 8th day. As soon as I woke up, I realized this wasn't going to be an easy experiment. No morning memes that usually helped me open my eyes. No music during my morning routine. And most importantly, no videos during breakfast. Without them, even the food seemed less tasty. Yes, it might not sound too difficult, but let's be honest. When was the last time you woke up without your phone? Without checking messages, emails, hopping onto Instagram, TikTok, checking the news, playing music? I can't remember either. Then I started walking, which went quite well. But I constantly wanted to get distracted by a video or check a message. I suddenly realized that over time I had developed a reflex. Work a little, then it's time for a little entertainment. Previously, this happened completely unconsciously, but now I had to control myself. Otherwise, I tried to occupy myself with useful things like cleaning or reading. But to be honest, I can't say that I had a lot of energy or desire to be productive. It was rather gloomy and boring, especially in the evening. There was a very strange feeling, as if the electricity in my house had been cut off. A sense that I didn't have access to my usual life and just had to wait for the power to come back on. And naively, I thought this might just be the first day and that it would get better, but I was wrong. The second day started off frankly bad. I didn't gain any energy or enthusiasm. On the contrary, My mood was at rock bottom and I didn't feel like doing anything. There was a sense of emptiness and meaninglessness. Why work if after work you can treat yourself to some tasty junk food while watching an interesting series? I tried to pull myself together and distract myself, and I engaged in various activities. I tried to write a script, read, played chess by myself, tried meditating, but none of this had any effect on my state. I felt that my inner dopamine addict was experiencing real withdrawal. In general, this is definitely much harder than I expected, and it's not easy to describe my feelings, but it's as if I'm experiencing some kind of breakdown. It feels very similar to what I experienced during my fasting experiment, meaning it's actually almost just as difficult, very hard. Also, I noticed how strongly I was attached to my phone. I realized that I constantly carried it with me, regardless of whether I needed it at the moment or not. It always had to be within arm's reach. And even though I couldn't use my phone now, I still always took it with me, especially to the toilet. It seems I had formed a ritual: working, take out my phone, sit on the couch, take out my phone, lie down on the bed, take out my phone, waiting for something, take out my phone. And I continued to take it out every time, encountering a reminder that I wouldn't get any dopamine here. The third day became the hardest for me. I kept waking up at night and didn't get enough sleep. My state was outright depressive. I didn't want to do anything at all. The previous effects only intensified. In addition, anxiety and irritability appeared. Never before had ordinary silence annoyed me so much. But if there were any sounds, they annoyed me even more. And if I did at least something on the previous days, now I mostly just lay there and stared at the ceiling. It turns out the desire to watch something or relax can be quite torturous. Intuitively, I wanted to just get absorbed in something, to be in that state for a while, where you forget everything and think about nothing, because you're so caught up in a movie plot or the thought of winning a round in a game. Waking up after a long, deep sleep, I felt that something had changed. It's unclear what exactly, but something definitely changed. And the more time passed, the more I felt it. The anxiety gave way to a kind of calmness. The silence no longer bothered me, and I was no longer concerned about not being able to watch YouTube during breakfast. I finally managed to tackle the tasks that seemed to have been lying on the surface. For example, I had a bunch of purchased courses on various topics, and I always told myself that I would start one of them soon. But something always got in the way. Now it's as if some barrier has disappeared, and starting a task became easier, precisely because of dopamine. The brain realizes that in the initial stage you only need to expend energy, and the reward will only come in the distant future. And that's not even certain. As more time passed, I became more convinced that I wasn't imagining things, that something really had changed. And most likely, it had to do with dopamine receptors. Due to the constant consumption of dopamine in large amounts, the sensitivity of dopamine receptors decreases. Apparently, these few days were enough for the sensitivity to be restored to some extent. Things that I wouldn't have noticed before could now bring me to entirely positive emotions. Of course, I still wanted to consume dopamine, especially social media. But now, it was no longer like a withdrawal, but rather a feeling that I might be missing out on something. What if something important happened, and I'm the only one not aware? What if all the wars in the world ended?
No, that's nonsense.
Overall, I definitely started accomplishing much more in a day. My mind worked better, and a lot of ideas came for videos, and not just for videos. I can't say that I suddenly became some kind of superhuman who meditates 10 hours a day. No, but I feel very much alive somehow. This state reminded me of early childhood. When everything around you is interesting, you could spend a whole hour building with a constructor set or observing some bugs. What I felt most was that I suddenly had a lot of time. I get all tasks done, and there's still plenty of time left. Even though my activities haven't changed, I just freed up the part of time that was taken by the most popular drug of the 21st century, dopamine. I even lost the desire to sit at home. I remember that I have a bunch of friends, and spending time with them in person is much more interesting than liking their photos on Instagram, and it's more enjoyable to play chess with someone. By the way, I think chess is the most underrated game of our time. It's practically like Dota. I definitely understood very important things for myself. I can never rid myself of the awareness that we are all in the wheel of daily dopamine consumption, and most importantly, the more we consume it, the less capable we are of anything besides even more consumption. And honestly, it's a bit frightening. I also realize that there is no need to abruptly and radically give up dopamine. Trust me, if you're someone who goes to bed and wakes up with a phone, it will definitely be very hard for you. Instead, try to consume dopamine systematically by setting various limits. For example, no more than 2 hours of social media per day, or try to reward yourself with dopamine. For instance, I can watch a series, but only if I finish my work, or only if I do 50 squats. Try to consume dopamine as consciously as possible, and perhaps, over time, you will become a completely different person without exaggeration.